Good evening, internet gamers. I'm Alexa, resident ookie spooky girly, and hey, does anybody want to guess what I'm dressed up as today? Sure, it might not be as scary as some of the games I'm about to talk about, but I love it. So if you guessed a little sister from BioShock, you'd be correct. Back in 2019, a friend of mine and I went to Fan Expo in Toronto together, and he was the Big Daddy correspondent to this cosplay, and gosh, it was so much fun. I really need to get around to doing some more horror cosplays, but after I finish my plans for Toronto Comic Con. Oh, before I get sidetracked, question for you. What's your favorite video game? I'm always going to be partial to Sims 2, specifically for the Game Boy Advance. The citizens of Strangetown deserved more, if you know what I mean. The DS game was also fun, but the reality TV storyline and episode format is such a fun fever dream. On that note, welcome to the top 5 disturbing games so scary they could get banned. Number 5, Manhunt. I've seen folks describe this one as playing through a, snuff film? After all, the premise of this game revolves around the idea of entertaining a twisted director who isn't satisfied with the killings you commit unless they're as violent as possible. Technically speaking, Manhunt is a stealth game played from a third-person perspective. The game consists of 20 levels, called scenes, as well as 4 unlockable bonus scenes. Players survive the scenes by dispatching enemy gang members, occasionally with firearms, but primarily by stealthily executing them. At the end of each scene, players are graded based on their performance and awarded 1 to 5 stars. Unlockable content becomes available when the player reaches 3 or more stars on a certain number of levels. On normal difficulty, which is called FETISH, players can only earn 4 stars. 1 is awarded for completing the scene under a certain amount of time, and 1 to 3 stars are awarded based on the brutality of the executions carried out during the scene. On hard difficulty, called Hardcore, players are graded out of 5 stars. 1 for speed, 1 to 3 for brutality, and 1 for completing the scene. To gain the maximum amount of stars, a set number of brutal executions must be carried out over the course of each scene. Face-to-face fighting doesn't award stars. So it was released for PlayStation 2 in November of 2003, making it 20 years old now, followed by Microsoft Windows and Xbox releases in April of 2004. Making that part only 19. It really is the rare game that forces you to question just how much you crave violence in a video game. It's hard to get over the realization that your own pursuit of increasingly violent killing is really about your own amusement rather than the necessity of the situation. The game received positive reviews from critics and won several accolades, with particular praise directed at its dark, gritty tone and violent gameplay, although the combat and level design were criticized. Granted, Manhunt 2 is the more violent game of the pair, but I have to give credit to the original in this instance. The original game was ruled injurious to the public by the New Zealand government and was actually blamed for a high-profile UK killing. Surprising everybody, the studio doubled down with the sequel. So yeah, I'll talk about Manhunt 2 for a moment. It was given the classification of adults only by the ESRB, and since Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony don't allow AO titles on their platforms, Manhunt 2 was kinda banned in the US. The game was eventually released in America some months later after Rockstar made extensive changes to the game's brutality, either removing or blurring horrific killings and abolishing the kill rating system. However, it took another year of legal battles to persuade the BBFC to change their minds, and the censored Manhunt 2 was finally released in the UK. Did anybody play the uncensored version? Let me know in the comments. Number 4, Rule of Rose. So it's always been like a controversial game. Fun fact, this PS2 survival horror game was banned in the UK at the time of its 2006 release, and it was almost banned in several other countries as well. While some of those bans can be attributed to a lie-fueled moral panic designed to score political points among moralists, there's no denying that Rule of Rose is a deeply disturbing game. Set in England back in 1930, the plot revolves around a 19-year-old woman named Jennifer, who becomes trapped in a world ruled by young girls who have established a class hierarchy called the Red Crayon Aristocrats. Described as essentially an interactive movie by its director Suji Ishikawa and associate producer Yuya Takayama, the narrative of Rule of Rose centers on the traumatic memories of Jennifer, who, originally she's just like an ordinary vulnerable girl. These memories sometimes manifest, though, in exaggerated ways. Okay, heads up folks, spoiler time since I'm obsessed with the plot. So once again, I know, 19-year-old Jennifer, she's given an unfinished storybook by a mysterious boy on a bus ride, and he runs away before she can return it, while following him to the dilapidated Rose Garden orphanage and witnesses masked young people, herding a red-soaked sack. She infiltrates the orphanage before a funeral is announced, which the boy claims is for her dear friend. After the funeral, Jennifer unearths the coffin and notices the red sack inside, but the orphans force her into the coffin and onto an airship, where she wakes up as the captive of the boy who introduces himself as the Prince of the Red Rose. Now, she is made the lowest member of the Red Rose aristocracy, who require monthly gifts as tithes for the Prince and Princess of the Red Rose, with failure leading to humiliation or sacrifice to a being called Stray Dog. The prince gives Jennifer handmade storybooks to help recover her memories and releases her to participate in club activities. Jennifer frequently faces punishment for incidents caused by higher-ranking members, but manages to rescue a yellow Labrador named Brown, who accompanies her and helps her along the way. She befriends other lower-class members, Amanda and Wendy, and gradually recalls an oath she had made as the experiences of Jennifer reflect the storybooks. Now, combat is almost exclusively melee-based, with a variety of improvised weapons available, such as kitchen tools and pipes. Jennifer is a timid character. Her melee attacks are neither powerful nor long-ranged. Evasion of enemies is often a more viable strategy instead of, This game was first released in 2006 by Sony Computer Entertainment in Japan, and after Sony Computer Entertainment's American and European branch didn't express interest in localizing the title, it was later published by Atlas USA in North America and by 505 Games in Europe. The very concept of a survival horror title starring such a young playable protagonist is troubling enough. But what really puts this one over the top, though, is the commitment to making young Jennifer endure some of the most indescribable horrors you've ever seen in such a title. Rule of Rose falls somewhere between a Silent Hill game and one of those old gothic fairy tales that I love so much but tend to freak out everyone I tell them to. If you've ever wanted to watch a young person battle the manifestations of their elaborate nightmares while their only companion, a lovable dog, is constantly in danger, this is the game for you. Anybody got a copy I can borrow? Number 3, Outlast. Well, it's certainly one of the more popular games on today's list. Don't let Outlast's bigger budget and better presentation values give you the wrong impression. This is easily one of the most disturbing horror games ever made. Released in 2013, it's a first-person survival horror video game developed and published by Red Barrels. Outlast throws you into just about the worst scenario imaginable with no real way to defend yourself. Even worse, you kind of have to stare directly at the things that frighten you the most in order to ensure that they can't see you. Alright, spoiler time everybody, let's jump into the storyline. Freelance investigative journalist Miles Upshur receives an anonymous email that inhumane experiments are being conducted at Mount Massive Asylum, a private psychiatric hospital owned by the notoriously unethical Murkoff Corporation. Upon entering, Miles is shocked to discover its halls are ransacked and littered with the mutilated corpses of the staff. He's informed by a dying officer of Murkoff's private military unit that Mount Massive's deranged inmates, known as variants, have escaped and are freely roaming the grounds, butchering the employees. Now, the officer implores Miles to escape and reveals that the main doors can be unlocked by security control. Moving on, Miles is suddenly ambushed by a hulking variant named Chris Walker, who knocks him unconscious. While incapacitated, Miles encounters Father Martin Archambaud. I think I got that right? A self-appointed priest with, personality disorder, who claims that Miles is his apostle and sabotages his escape by cutting off power to the front doors. Now, Miles restores power, but Father Martin injects him with an anesthetic. He shows Miles footage of the Wall Rider, a ghostly entity killing patients and personnel alike, which he claims is responsible for the asylum's ransacking. Regaining consciousness, Miles finds himself trapped in a decaying cell block filled with catatonic and demented patients. He escapes through the sewers to the main wards, pursued by Walker and 2 people-eating twins, only to be captured by Richard Traeger, a former executive-driven insane. Traeger amputates 2 of Miles' fingers with a pair of bone shears, preparing to do the same to his tongue and, However, Miles escapes to an elevator, inadvertently crushing Traeger to death between floors when he attacks him. Now, Miles reconvenes with Father Martin, who tells him to go to the asylum's chapel. Reaching an auditorium, Miles learns that the Wall Rider was created by Dr. Rudolf Gustav Wernicke, a German scientist brought to the US during Operation Paperclip. If you know, you know. Wernicke believes that intensive dream therapy conducted on traumatized patients could connect swarms of nanites into a single malevolent being. In the chapel, Miles finds a crucified Father Martin, who gives Miles a key to the atrium elevator that he insists will take him to freedom before immolating himself. Miles takes the elevator, which descends into a subterranean laboratory. Walker attacks him, only to be eviscerated by the Wall Rider. Miles locates an aged Wernicke, who confirms that the Wall Rider is a biotechnological nanite entity controlled by Billy Hope, a comatose subject of the experiments at the asylum. He orders Miles to terminate Billy's life support in the hope that this will destroy the Wall Rider. Miles accomplishes his task, however, just before Billy dies, the W attacks Miles and possesses his body. On his way out of the lab, Miles encounters a Murkoff military team led by Wernicke, who attacks him. Now, a horrified Wernicke realizes that Miles is the new host, and panic screams and explosives are heard as the screen fades to black. Hey look, that's scary and all, but what really makes this one special are the ways this game goes out of its way to show you the troubling consequences of getting caught. It's one thing for someone to catch you and end your game. It's another for that thing to catch you and mutilate you. Number 2, Left 4 Dead 2. The game made its world premiere premiere at E3 2009 with a trailer during the Microsoft press event. Prior to release, it received mixed critical and community reactions and attracted an unusually high volume of controversy about its graphic content. In response, alterations were made to the cover art. Despite the fact that the previous game was launched without issue, the OFLC ruled that Left 4 Dead 2's realistic, frantic, and relentless violence made it unfit for sale in Australia. In the weeks leading up to the game's intended release, the game's developers opposed the ban, but the Classification Review Board upheld the ruling, citing insufficient distinction between the representation of zombie characters and human beings. So the developers eventually relented, releasing a heavily cut version of the game, in doing so removing decapitation, dismemberment, wound detail, and piles of dead bodies, until 5 years later in August of 2014, when the uncut version was finally reclassified as R18+ and authorized for sale. Like its predecessor, Left 4 Dead 2 is set in the aftermath of a worldwide panini of a disease nicknamed the Green Flu, which rapidly transforms humans into zombie-like creatures and mutated forms that demonstrate extreme aggression towards non-infected beings. A few humans are immune to the disease, while some of those who are infected have no symptoms. Sound familiar? The Civil Emergency and Defense Agency and the US military create safe zones to attempt to evacuate as many survivors as possible. Left 4 Dead 2 introduces 4 new survivors: Coach, Ellis, Nick, and Rochelle, who are immune to the disease and have individual backstories that are provided through character dialogue. While the game is intended as a continuation of the original, occurring 1 week after the first game begins, the developers decided to create a whole new group, because of the change in location. Like the first game, the 5 campaigns in Left 4 Dead 2 take place across a story arc. Set in the Deep South, the story begins in Savannah, Georgia, and ends in New Orleans, Louisiana. The survivors have to fight their way through hordes of infected, using safe houses along the way to rest and recuperate in order to reach extraction points. So, yay zombies? Number 1, Silent Hill Homecoming. Yep, the Silent Hill franchise is a franchise of, probably the most popular franchise on this list. I remember the first time in high school when I saw someone dressed up as a Silent Hill nurse, and I was both horrified and intrigued. Being the 6th installment in the Silent Hill series, Homecoming follows the journey of Alex Shepard, a soldier returning from war to his hometown of Shepherd's Glen, where he finds the town in disarray and his younger brother is nowhere to be found. As he continues on his search to find his little brother, he discovers more about the Order, cult, as well as the town's history and his own past. The game was released on September 30th of 2008 in North America for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and the Microsoft Windows version was released on November 6th, exclusively through Steam. Being one of the most popular horror franchises, though, doesn't come without some gory sequences. Homecoming got the worst of it, since it's the only one that's ever been outright banned. It was banned in Germany and Australia, mostly due to a single scene. Main character Alex is wrestling with Margaret Holloway over an electric drill, and the scene ends with one of them getting gruesomely drilled into, which was obviously a bit too much for some standards. So the developers had to release a censored version, changing the camera angles around for it to be released. Darn. And that brings us to the end of our time, and gosh, I really need to get into video games more. Seriously, I only ever play DS or Game Boy Advance games these days, although I do have some Nancy Drew games waiting for me on Steam that could use some love. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more recommendations from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.